Black Myth: Wukong is an action-adventure game inspired by the classic novel Journey to the West. In Black Myth: Wukong, we are a monkey on an epic journey following the shadows of the legendary Monkey King Sun Wukong. This fantasy world is filled with ancient Chinese folklore and legends. Combat is fast-paced with a variety of enemies and bosses. Wukong's core gameplay is centered around fast-paced, challenging combat and light exploration. Combat is up close and personal. We have a combination of light and heavy attacks, maybe a parry, a dodge, special ability. These special abilities include various mystical abilities such as summoning clones of ourselves or casting an elemental spell. This also includes transformations. We have the ability to shape shift into different creatures, and this plays a key role in creating a different combat style or ability depending on the transformation. Boss encounters and challenging enemies are a core part of this gameplay loop. Expect these fights to require precise timing, an understanding of attack patterns, and a strategic use of our abilities. Black Myth: Wukong is designed to be challenging, requiring players to learn enemy patterns, master combat mechanics, and be prepared for frequent deaths. This game emphasizes player skill and timing rather than relying heavily on a leveling up or an equipment system. It is worth noting you don't lose things when you die. The game is separated into 6 chapters. Each chapter unlocks new combat abilities, enemies, and biomes. Progression is boss walled. You will have to beat a boss to move forward. Character progression centers around upgrading our abilities, transformations, and combat powers. As we defeat more enemies and bosses, we will earn the resources we need to enhance our skills or unlock new powers. From a narrative progression, this unfolds with each completed level or boss battle, which then reveals more of the journey. Cutscenes and dialogue sequences provide depth to the narrative. Characters are rarely properly introduced. The dialogue assumes you already know the names, backstories, and relationships. Our monkey is mostly silent, while the other characters we encounter do all the talking. If you grew up with and are well versed in the culture surrounding the Journey to the West literature, this setting will have some immersive qualities. There's a clear expectation that you have spent time before in the stories told in the Journey to the West with these worlds and these characters, as the story provides little to no world building or context. As we meet characters, a journal fills in. These journal entries have an informal writing style. They do help flesh out the world if you stop and read them. However, they require context clues and sometimes prior knowledge to fully grasp. Sometimes these stories detail events from the past or just outside this game entirely. Graphically, the 6 core chapters have great environmental variety. Each location has a distinct visual design and art direction. The atmosphere feels like it lines up with the visuals in a compelling fashion. I think the boss enemies, the cutscenes, the combat animations, they all seem to be in acceptable quality. Most levels have a handful of very scenic locations that are just begging for a good screenshot. On the technical side, there do seem to be some issues with clipping objects, armors, fight. There's just visual clipping through objects at times that you just kind of don't expect it. The shadows and lightings really struggle in a few locations. There's a lot of constant flickering and strobing. It seems to be pretty localized. It won't be in the whole level, but every once in a while you'll kind of come through a cave and you'll turn around and it'll just blow your eyes out and you've got no idea why. Several boss arenas are very scenic for a photo, but they have these deep shadows and kind of heavy sunlight shafts that just make the boss encounter just not the best experience with the lighting and shadows. Overall, though, I think graphically and visually, this seems to be designed to be screenshotted. That's right. Level design, well, each level has a handful of boss fights and relevant story moments across the vast and also closed loop of the map. Chapter 1 has a forest biome, Chapter 2 a desert, Chapter 3 a snow, and so on. Levels were really designed to look pretty, ignoring the occasions where I fell through the floor while exploring. Functionally, they work. However, the level design is non-intuitive. It lacks the depth and variety to stay interesting for long. It's also impossible to tell where you can actually go, as a just army of invisible walls will eventually force you down, a linear path. On more than one occasion, I was completely lost, and since over time every path starts to look the same, I ended up just bouncing off invisible walls until I found the next checkpoint. Balance is all over the place. Most enemies either feel just way too easy or exceptionally frustrating. Ultimately, your ability to time dodges is going to pretty much decide how hard combat is. For example, in the very first chapter, the fourth unskippable boss, it's a main story boss, is a proper 2-phase boss. That's right, epic cutscene and a full second health bar. This boss in the second phase has a self-healing mechanic that passively regenerates health whenever it's under 50%. It's just wildly overcooked, as at that time in progression, you basically have no levels, gears, abilities, transformations. It is quite literally the fourth mandatory boss you have to fight. Some fights feel like more RNG than actual skill. For example, in chapter 2, there's an optional side boss who has a floor pound mechanic. This boss arena has a handful of destructible rocks that are best to stand on to avoid this floor damage. However, sometimes the rocks get destroyed early into the fight, and this means your run's pretty much doomed right at the start. That RNG doesn't feel great. Another example is maybe you've mismanaged your build and made some fights harder than they're supposed to be. For example, the final boss of chapter 3, in his final phase, there's a shield. If you build a build that has spec'd enough points into using a charged heavy attack, you can easily break this boss's shield. But if you didn't build that specific way, this fight is significantly harder. Now, it is important to know you can respec an unlimited number of times for no cost. This means that even though I think balance has been wildly mismanaged, you can really try out a lot of different builds to overcome the more frustrating enemies. Also of note, the first 5 chapters of 6 all have an optional side secret zone. Most of these bosses in the side secret optional zones I found to have a slightly higher degree of challenge than the main story unskippable bosses for that zone. The secret side bosses tended to reward an item that would directly counter the story boss later on. So it's almost always worth finding these secret zones. However, if you could beat the optional secret zone more challenging bosses, you usually could already destroy the slightly weaker main story progression bosses. Pacing felt just as mismanaged as the balance. Some levels felt like they ended without warning, which locked progression forward. Yes, you can return to previous levels, but you might have been locked out of a unique quest item. You also might hit a cutscene that's just a few moments, just a blink of the eye, right? And other times you hit a cutscene and it's like 5 or 10 minutes. It just goes on forever. Levels tended to overstay their welcome. They all went on just a little too long. Lots of open space that seems to exist solely for the view. From a pacing standpoint, it's just not great. Sometimes you run into a few bosses back to back to back, and other times you may have been exploring for, an hour, just lost and found nothing. In the 4th chapter, there's a big cave, and I got lost and I ran in circles for much longer than I care to remember. The 3rd chapter has a few minutes of just trudging through scenic snow. No danger, no reward, just walking through scenic snow. The balance between action and slower moments I felt was really lacking. Overall, creating, a weakness in the momentum and the immersive opportunities that scenic view holds is just really broken down. Black Myth Wukong does have a new Game Plus option. Achievement hunters should expect needing a second run to secure all the achievements. There are currently no branching narratives or choices to warrant a second run. A new Game Plus run does not introduce new enemies, new zones, or endings. Crafting some weapons and armor sets will require a second run, as there is a limited number of some crafting materials. Black Myth Wukong's mythological setting is a unique selling point. Pulling from the classic novel Journey to the West allows for a rich and imaginative world filled with mythical creatures, ancient lore, and stunning visuals. Wukong's combat system is designed to be fast-paced, challenging, and rewarding. Its challenging difficulty and a focus on player skill also kind of adds its own unique twist. I don't think any of these are truly innovative or original. Other titles have similar settings or, core gameplay design, but I also don't think Black Myth Wukong needs to reinvent the wheel. and do something truly innovative and original. I think what it does well. Talking about value for money, using US dollars and looking at current prices for the base game only here. Currently, Black Myth Wukong is sitting at 60 US dollars. For comparison with similar titles around this price point, we could look at 2022 God of War at 50, 2024 God of War Ragnarok at 60, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice Game of the Year Edition at 60, Remnant 2 at 50, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor at 70. Wukong's biggest weakness is not limited content. I think most players start to finish gameplay hours for Wukong will be in the plus 50 hours range. For Black Myth Wukong, I think the variety of boss encounters, the quality of combat, and the visual setting are compelling. I'd like to have seen Wukong release at the more modest $40 range. Wukong is not the highest quality experience, but still has great value. I really enjoyed the ability to respec at will. I got to try a lot of different builds that really kept combat fresh. I like the lack of death penalty that really freed up mental space to focus on trying to win fights instead of minimize losses. I think the variety of enemies in Wukong is actually really great. The boss encounters overall felt unique and engaging. The story and world building just should have been better. I really wanted to know more of who was who and why are we fighting. You know, the lack of clarity around the actions and various motivations was definitely a frustration. I didn't fall in love with the look of a lot of the armor sets, and a transmog system would be a great addition. The armors often felt limited in what they offered, so at times it felt like I was forced to wear an ugly armor set because the bonus was so good for a specific encounter or zone. I'd also like to see more context clues in the environment, just where secrets are, just some hints, right? The secrets in Quest sometimes just were so incredibly obvious it just fell into our lap, and other times it felt like we had to really dig them up. I think that's more a weakness in level design than anything else. Overall, bugs, glitches, technical state is fine. I didn't directly encounter anything too egregious. If you're a fan of Journey to the West, I think Black Myth Wukong is a must play. You'll really enjoy the various characters and setting. Black Myth Wukong was really designed with this player in mind. Its attention to detail is truly a passion project and a love letter to the literary classic that Journey to the West is. If you're a huge fan of the FromSoft Souls games, I think you'll find the combat engaging, but you'll be frustrated by how easy overall things are. Black Myth Wukong has difficulty, but it's really designed to be beaten by the masses. It's designed to have that everyone should hopefully be able to get through these encounters with the right build if needed. You know, this game likely will have a strong appeal to anyone who just enjoys a good boss rush and very light exploration narrative, just really focused on that combat. Now, the recent 2018 and 2022 God of War and God of War Ragnarok have a lot of similarities in their gameplay loop. I'm Vadd, and at the time of review, Black Myth Wukong is awarded a 3 out of 5, which is good, and I recommend.